Hello, U.S. history students. Today we are going to cover Chapter 24, Section 3, which is the presidency of Gerald Ford. And we're going to have two major topics, domestic issues and foreign policy. However, before we jump into the section, let's talk a little bit of review here. So Gerald Ford becomes president after Spiro Agnew, the vice president under President Nixon, right, leaves. So Spiro Agnew was the vice president, and he leaves due to taking bribes. So Gerald Ford becomes the vice president. Then a year later, President Nixon leaves because of the resigns due to the Watergate incident, and Ford becomes the president. Okay, so he inherits an extremely difficult situation. So he has to inherit the fallout from the Watergate incident, and all of the obstruction cases there, and the possible court cases that could linger due to these problems and issues with Watergate. He has to deal with President Nixon being the first president to ever resign from office. He has to deal with Nixon's issues regarding stagflation, high unemployment, and high inflation. And then foreign policy, he has to deal with Vietnam War, and he also has to deal with, obviously, continuation of the Cold War. A rough road. Well, at the conclusion of Nixon's resignation, Gerald Ford, right, moves into the office of the presidency. And what he does is he grants a full pardon to Richard Nixon, who hasn't undergone any court cases. So you can have a pardon, which means basically the person you're pardoning is free from all crimes, okay, and gets to go home free. And the power of a pardon, at least in terms of federal cases, right, is in Article 2 of the Constitution, which describes the power, the roles, responsibility of the president. And so according to Article 2, Gerald Ford has the right constitutionally to pardon Richard Nixon, and he does. And he says our long national nightmare is over. Okay. However, there's a great amount of backlash to this, okay? And you're going to have to work this out. And later on, we're going to compare it to the Iran-Contra affair the next decade with President Reagan. So many people were upset because if Nixon committed crimes, then he should be held accountable for those crimes. Others were on the side of Ford and just said, let bygones be bygones, that it would literally tear apart this country if we had to go through criminal court cases regarding an ex-president. So he made the tough decision and said, it's just time to move on. And here you have a copy of the actual pardon of Richard Nixon. Okay. So after Nixon is pardoned, economic issues. And we already talked about the major issues here, right? So one of the reasons why there's so much inflation, which means high prices, is because there's such a high demand of oil and such a small supply. Okay. And so Ford comes up with this slogan called whip inflation now. Okay. And he says he wants Americans to cut back on gas. But the problem is he's not really giving much incentive to cut back on gas. And you see how that would affect people's travel, it affect businesses and so on. Okay. And there's no real big incentives. Like, what do I get from this? Okay. In addition to trying to help the economy, in addition to saying, hey, really lower your gasoline purchases or your gasoline usage, he has what we call tight money as opposed to loose money. Tight money simply means that you're being very careful to how you spend your money. Okay. Tight money means the government is going to cut spending, but we don't know exactly on what specific programs though, right? And restrict credit. Okay. Which means that it's much more difficult to get a loan, or it might be higher interest rates and so on. Okay. And those are going to help, allegedly, right, bring down inflation. And the reality is they don't. So the United States is going to continue to struggle all the way through the 70s, early 80s economically. Okay. And we'll discuss that more with the next president, Jimmy Carter, and his attempt to lower unemployment and lower inflation. Let's talk about foreign policy real quick here. Okay. So what do we know? Let's see. Nixon actually has a period of détente, a friendlier relationship, right, with the communist countries of the Soviet Union and China. Remember, he visits the Soviet Union, he visits China, he mainly visits China to try and drive a wedge between the relationship between those two communist countries, and he's fairly successful at it. Okay. Well, in 1974, President Ford meets with the Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev and the city of Helsinki in Finland. And it's actually a meeting between over 30 countries, those that are in the NATO organization, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and those that are in the Warsaw Pact. Okay. So what happens is more than 30 countries, okay, they agree to greater cooperation between each other, mainly between Eastern and Western European nations, okay? That the borders that were decided after World War II, okay, are going to be left intact, okay? And in addition, what the United States wanted was obviously more security, that countries in the Western Europe would not be attacked or possibly overrun by communist nations. But in return, the United States said, well, what we want is greater human rights in the Soviet Union and in those Eastern European communist countries, right? That, for example, people who spoke out against the Soviet Union or people that wrote books or plays or music, whatever it is, that they would not basically go to jail for simply speaking out against the government, what we would call, political dissidents, okay? So we have a continuation of détente, right? A friendly relationship with the Soviet Union, okay? Now, we still haven't completely got rid of this Vietnam issue, the Vietnam problem. Remember, Vietnamization, Richard Nixon would slowly bring troops back home, and the South Vietnamese army, they were going to be basically completely in charge of themselves, of protecting themselves against the Viet Cong, right? And against Northern Vietnam, okay? However, what happens is this. In 1973, right when the American troops leave, pretty much everybody knows that South Vietnam will not be able to handle protecting themselves against the communists, okay? And so Ford asked Congress for over $700 million to help South Vietnam. Congress refuses, okay? Just straight out says, no, we're done with Vietnam. That's it, okay? Now, the United States had reneged on a promise, meaning hadn't gone back on a promise. The United States had promised South Vietnam, we're not completely, totally leaving you alone. What we're saying is you're responsible to protect yourself. However, if you need some help, we're still going to back you up. But the reality is by 1973, United States, most of the public, politicians, Democrats and Republicans were pretty much done with it. Enough Americans had died. Enough Americans have had serious physical, mental health issues. Enough money was put into it that really they were done. Okay? So in 1975, what happens is a double whammy. Okay? So in 1975, North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, right? The communists in South Vietnam overrun South Vietnam. Basically a full-scale invasion. And this picture here you see is people trying to escape, going to the top of the building onto a helicopter to basically get out of South Vietnam, okay? Afraid of the ramifications of payback from the Vietnamese, okay? So Vietnam literally falls, right? And the entire country of Vietnam is reunited, but reunited under a communist type of government under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh. At the same time this is going on, what happens is in 1975, Cambodia also has their own communist revolution, which you may remember if any of you took world history, okay? I think all of you took world history, right? Okay, let's move on, right? So Cambodia was overthrown by a communist political organization called the Khmer Rouge, meaning the Red Communists, okay? And they were against American involvement, and America still had some naval ships out over here right along the coast of Cambodia, right? And so what they did is they basically took control of a U.S. ship called Mayaguez and took many of the Marines off the ship and put them on to a small little island. and Ford said, we're going to rescue them. And so what happened was there was a plane that went out there and it crashed due to technical difficulties. Okay. A few of the Marines died during the battle. A few of them were left behind and were actually executed. Okay. And so what ends up happening, though, is that the majority of the originally kidnapped Marines are able to get back home successfully. But this is just seen, this Mayaguez incident is what it's called, as one of a series of continued foreign affairs blunders and or mistakes in Southeast Asia. So to sum it all up, right, Ford is only going to be president, for a couple of years. So how is he going to campaign and yet also have to deal with the inflation problems in the United States, the distrust of government from Watergate, right? Deal with the Soviet Union and also deal with the leftovers, right, of the decisions made by various administrations before him in Vietnam. Okay, so the next video will talk about President Carter. All right, thank you, and I will talk to you later.